The galaxy had been at peace for centuries, a delicate balance of power maintained by long-established empires and alliances. The mighty Xalvans, one of the most feared races, had dominated space for generations. Their fleets moved like shadows, and their influence spread far and wide. No one questioned their strength. But the humans of Earth, small, unnoticed, and considered weak by most, were about to change everything. Captain Eric Duran stood on the observation deck of Earth's newly built headquarters, staring out into the vastness of space. His eyes traced the stars, but his mind was elsewhere. There was an uneasy silence in the air, a stillness that felt like the calm before a storm. He knew that something was coming, something that would change the course of history forever. Earth had spent years in secret. For the first time, humanity was no longer looking at the stars in wonder. They were building their own future among them. Hidden from the prying eyes of the galactic empires, a project was underway, one that could make Earth a formidable power in its own right. The Xalvans had always dismissed humanity as insignificant. To them, Earth was just a speck of dust, barely worth a second glance. The Galactic Council, the governing body of the galaxy, had never taken humanity seriously either. Earth was a quiet, isolated planet, perfectly safe, and far from the grand schemes of war that consumed the more powerful civilizations. But now, everything was about to change. Eric knew that. He'd been part of the team that had worked tirelessly on Earth's greatest secret, a weapon unlike any other, a warship that could rival the fleets of the galaxy's strongest powers. It wasn't just a ship, it was a symbol of humanity's potential, a testament to what they could achieve when pushed to their limits. The warship, still hidden in a remote part of the solar system, was nearing completion. It had been built in secrecy, far from the eyes of those who might try to stop it. But that would only last so long. The Xalvan's fleet was already on the move. Their intelligence suggested that Earth was unprotected, vulnerable. They thought they could strike quickly, wipe out any resistance, and return home with little effort. They were wrong. As Eric watched the stars, he couldn't help but feel the weight of what was coming. The warship was still in its final stages, and Earth's military was not yet fully prepared to face a force like the Xalvans. But Eric wasn't scared. He was determined. He had seen the power of the warship firsthand. He had felt it hum beneath his feet, the promise of unimaginable strength. If the warship could work, if it could be as powerful as they hoped, Earth's fate could change forever. He turned away from the observation window and walked towards the command center. His footsteps echoed in the empty hallways. He could feel the tension in the air, the quiet anxiety of those around him. Everyone was waiting for something, but no one knew what that something would be. The warship was ready, but was Earth ready for what it might bring? The silence in the command center was almost suffocating as Eric took his place at the console. His team was already there, working tirelessly to prepare for the worst. They were watching the Xalvan's fleet, which had entered Earth's outer orbit. There was no communication, no warning, just the cold, calculated approach of the invaders. "Captain, we've detected their fleet. They're moving fast," one of his officers, Lieutenant Rhea, reported, her voice steady, but betraying the nerves she was trying to hide. "Have they detected us?" Eric asked, though he already knew the answer. The Xalvans wouldn't have a clue what they were about to face. "No, sir. We're still undetected," Rhea replied, her fingers flying over the controls. Eric nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it. Earth's moment was finally here. The ship they had built, the one that had been designed to defend Earth from threats like the Xalvans, was about to make its first appearance. No one knew how it would perform in real battle. But Eric had faith. Faith in the people who had designed it. Faith in the technology that was now at their fingertips. "Prepare to launch the warship," Eric ordered. His voice was calm, but inside, he could feel the adrenaline rushing through his veins. This was the moment they had been waiting for. Rhea nodded and quickly relayed the orders. The warship's engines roared to life, its massive frame breaking free from the shadows of Earth's moon, its sleek body cutting through the silence of space. It was more than just a ship, it was a promise that Earth was no longer the weak, helpless planet it had once been. As the warship moved into position, Eric's thoughts drifted back to the early days of the project. The doubts, the struggles, the long hours of work and sacrifice. But now, it all seemed worth it. The warship was ready to show the galaxy that humanity would no longer be overlooked. "Captain," Ria's voice broke through his thoughts, "the Xalvans are entering our space." Eric's gaze hardened. Let them come. This was the moment they had been waiting for. The calm before the storm had ended, and the battle for Earth's future was about to begin. The warship was their last hope, but it was also their greatest weapon. And for the first time in history, humanity would stand tall against the galaxy's most powerful forces. The storm was here, and Earth was ready. The silence of space was suddenly shattered by a loud, vibrating hum that emanated from Earth's hidden warship. Its massive form hovered just outside the atmosphere, its sleek armor reflecting the light from distant stars. On board, Captain Eric Duran stood, his hands gripping the control panel as the ship's engines roared to life. "We're ready, Captain." Lieutenant Ria's voice came through the communication system, steady but filled with anticipation. "All systems are online. The warship is fully operational." Eric took a deep breath. This was it, the moment they had been preparing for. He glanced at the main view screen, where the enemy fleet, the Xalvans, were coming into view. The ships were enormous, their dark, angular shapes cutting through space like menacing shadows. Each ship looked like it could obliterate Earth in a single strike. And yet, Eric felt no fear. Instead, a fierce resolve washed over him. Humanity had never been given a chance, but that was about to change. "Lock on to their lead ship. Prepare to fire the main cannon," Eric ordered, his voice low but firm. His team moved quickly, adjusting the settings and confirming targets. The warship's main cannon had never been tested in real combat before, but the reports were clear. If it worked, it would change everything. Outside, the Xalvans continued their approach, unaware of the trap waiting for them. Their ships were sleek and deadly, but they weren't ready for the weapon Earth had been hiding. They were used to crushing enemies who dared to challenge them, but they had never encountered a force like this. "All systems go, Captain." "The cannon is charged and ready," Ria reported, her fingers flying over the console as the warship's weapons hummed with power. Eric nodded. "Fire." A flash of brilliant light erupted from the warship's main cannon, sending a wave of energy that rippled through space. The shot traveled faster than the eye could see, a streak of pure power aimed directly at the lead Xalvan ship. The enemy ship barely had time to react before the blast collided with its shields. The shields flared bright blue, and then flickered before they failed, leaving the ship exposed. The explosion that followed was unlike anything Eric had ever seen. The Xalvan ship, once a symbol of unmatched power, disintegrated in an instant, the debris scattered across space in a deadly spray. The shockwave from the blast rippled through the vacuum, shaking the warship. But it held strong. This was the power of humanity's ingenuity, the result of years of work, sweat, and secrecy. The Xalvans were stunned. No one had ever struck them like this before. Their fleets were known for their invincibility, their power unmatched across the galaxy. And yet, in a single moment, Earth had proven that it could fight back. "We've disabled their lead ship, Captain," Ria said, her voice filled with awe. "But they're not retreating. They're powering up their weapons." Eric's eyes narrowed as he watched the enemy ships begin to reposition. The Xalvans would not be so easily defeated, and they were about to retaliate. "Get us out of here. We need to keep moving. Don't let them regroup," Eric commanded, his voice sharp. The warship surged forward, its engines propelling it into the darkness of space. The Xalvans fired their weapons, beams of intense energy shooting toward the Earth warship. But the ship's advanced shields held strong, absorbing the blasts with barely a tremor. The warship had been designed not just to fight, but to survive. As the warship weaved through the Solvan fleet, Eric couldn't help but feel a sense of exhilaration. This was the moment. Humanity's fight for survival, for a place among the stars, had begun. They had shown the galaxy that they were not weak. They were not helpless. They were a force to be reckoned with. But the Solvans weren't backing down. They were regrouping, communicating with one another. Their ships began to form a tighter formation, their weapons charging again. It was clear that the first strike was only the beginning. The battle was far from over. "We've got incoming, Captain. Several enemy ships are locking onto us," Rhea warned, her hands flying across the control panel as she worked to adjust their defenses. Eric glanced at the view screen, his jaw set. The Solvans were fast. They were powerful, but they didn't understand humanity's true strength. "Prepare to launch the secondary cannons. We need to take out their flanking ships," Eric ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around him. The warship's secondary weapons activated with a series of sharp, precise blasts, cutting through the Solvan fleet's weaker ships. With each shot, Eric's confidence grew. They were not just surviving, they were winning. "Captain, we've got more ships incoming," Rhea said, her voice filled with urgency. "They've called for reinforcements. We need to get out of here before they overwhelm us." Eric's heart raced. The warship had done more than he had ever imagined. It had proven humanity's potential, but it couldn't hold off the entire Solvan fleet forever. The reinforcements were coming fast, and Earth's warship could only do so much. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," Eric ordered. "Get us out of here, Rhea. We've made our point. Now, we need to survive." The warship swerved and shot forward into the depths of space, narrowly avoiding incoming fire. The Solvans were relentless, but they were now questioning everything they had believed about Earth. For the first time in history, the galaxy was learning that humanity was not to be underestimated. The battle had just begun, and the war for Earth's future was far from over. But one thing was certain. The Solvans had underestimated humanity, and they would soon learn just how costly that mistake would be. The battle had taken an unexpected turn. In the depths of space, Earth's warship, once thought to be a myth, had made its first strike against the overwhelming Solvan fleet. The sudden, shocking display of power had left the aliens scrambling. But the war was far from over. The enemy wasn't going to give up that easily. Eric Duran stood at the helm, his eyes scanning the battle unfolding before him. His hands rested lightly on the control panel as his thoughts raced. The warship had inflicted heavy damage, but the Solvans were not retreating. They were regrouping, reorganizing, and preparing for their counterattack. And with reinforcements on the way, it was only a matter of time before they would outnumber them. "Captain, we've detected multiple ships approaching from behind." Lieutenant Rhea's voice came through the communication system, calm yet filled with urgency. "Their fleet is regrouping. They're coming in fast." Eric clenched his fists. He had expected this. The Solvans were relentless, and they didn't give up easily. But humanity had a surprise of its own. They had been hiding this warship for a reason, because they knew that the galaxy wouldn't be ready for Earth's full potential. And now, the Solvans were going to find out just how dangerous humans could be. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," Eric ordered. "We need to keep them off our backs long enough to regroup. We've got to buy time." The warship surged forward, its engines roaring to life as it swerved and twisted through the enemy's fire. The Solvans weren't used to this level of unpredictability. They were used to overpowering their enemies with sheer numbers and strength. But the Earth warship was different. It was fast, agile, and unpredictable. It was designed to adapt to any situation, and now it was showing the Solvans that humanity wasn't going down without a fight. On the view screen, the Solvan ships closed in, their weapons lighting up as they prepared to strike. The enemy fleet was determined to avenge the loss of their lead ship, and they weren't about to let Earth's warship get away without paying a price. "We're being surrounded," Rhea reported, her voice tight. "We need to break through their lines, or we're going to be sitting ducks." Eric's mind raced. They were outnumbered and outgunned. The warship could take a beating, but it wasn't invincible. The Salvans had an entire fleet, and they were closing in fast. But then, Eric's eyes flicked to the far side of the view screen. He could see it, the perfect opening. The enemy ships had made a critical mistake. They had underestimated Earth's ability to think outside the box. "Rhea," Eric said, his voice calm but full of authority, "I need you to hit their left flank with everything we've got. Give them no time to react." Rhea hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Understood, Captain." The warship adjusted its trajectory, banking hard to the left. Its secondary weapons fired in rapid succession, unleashing a barrage of energy beams that struck the Salvan ships on the left flank. The first few hits took out smaller vessels, their shields crumpling under the intense energy. But it was the larger ships that Eric was aiming for. Direct hit on their shield generators, Rhea reported, her voice filled with excitement. "We've weakened their defenses on the left side. They're trying to regroup." But just as the warship broke through, a new wave of enemy ships arrived. The reinforcements had come. "Captain, more ships inbound," Rhea shouted. "We've got a full fleet on our tail." The screen was filled with incoming enemy ships, each one more powerful than the last. Eric's heart raced, but his focus never wavered. This was the turning point, the moment where humanity would prove that it was not to be underestimated. The Salvans thought they were invincible, but they had just learned how wrong they were. "Activate the shield boosters," Eric commanded, his voice steady. "We need to withstand their fire long enough to escape. All cannons, prepare for another strike." The warship's shields flickered and flared as they absorbed the incoming fire. The crew worked in perfect unison, their movements a well-oiled machine. Despite the oncoming storm, Eric felt a surge of hope. Humanity had survived the first strike, and now they were about to take it to the next level. "We've got their reinforcements, Captain," Rhea said, her voice filled with relief. "We've taken out the enemy's flagship, and their line is breaking apart." Eric's eyes widened as he watched the Salvan fleet falter. The flagship, the heart of their fleet, had just been destroyed in a blinding flash. It was a major victory, but it was far from over. The Salvans were not finished, but humanity had proven something today. "We can win this," Eric muttered under his breath, as the enemy ships began to retreat. They had broken through. The Salvans were now second-guessing their superiority. But as Eric watched the battle unfold, he knew this was only the beginning. The warship had proven that humanity was no longer weak, but they still had a long way to go before they could claim victory. "We've made our mark, Rhea," Eric said, his voice filled with determination. "But the real fight is still ahead. We have to keep pushing." As the warship surged forward, leaving the retreating Salvan ships behind, Eric couldn't shake the feeling that the galaxy would never be the same again. Humanity had finally shown the universe that they were a force to be reckoned with. And this was only the beginning of their journey. The battle had been won, but the cost was clear. The warship had dealt a significant blow to the Salvan fleet, but it hadn't come without a price. The ship's hull was scared, and the crew was exhausted, their nerves frayed after the intensity of the engagement. For the first time in hours, the warship was still, drifting in the emptiness of space. The victorious cheers from the crew had died down, replaced by the hum of machinery and the distant clang of repairs being made. Eric Duran stood at the bridge, his hands clasped behind his back as he stared out into the dark void of space. The remnants of the Salvan fleet were scattered behind them, retreating at full speed, but he knew they wouldn't give up that easily. The Salvans were a prideful, relentless species. They'd come back with a vengeance. "Captain," Rhea's voice broke through his thoughts. She was at the tactical console, her eyes glued to the screens in front of her. There's something strange going on. We've detected an anomaly in that Solvent communications network. It's encrypted, but it's not like anything we've seen before. Eric's brow furrowed. He didn't like the sound of that. The Solvents were powerful, but they weren't known for their technical sophistication. This felt different. What's the anomaly? Eric asked, turning to face Rhea. His voice was calm, but his instincts were on high alert. It's a signal, a distress call, but it's coming from one of their deepest sectors, far beyond where their fleet should be. It's a coded message, but it's not directed at their forces. It's a call for reinforcements, but not just any reinforcements, Rhea said, her voice tinged with concern. These signals, they're warning about something they're afraid of. Eric felt a chill run down his spine. The Solvents weren't afraid of much, but the idea of them sending out a distress call, one that hinted at fear, was unsettling. This wasn't just a war anymore. Something bigger was happening. Can we decode it? Eric asked. Rhea hesitated before nodding. I'm working on it. It'll take some time, but I think we'll have something soon. Eric turned back to the view outside the ship. The stars were scattered across the blackness like pinpricks of light, but his mind was far from calm. Something was off. The Solvents were powerful, but if they were afraid of something, it meant there was a much bigger threat looming just beyond the horizon. Captain, came another voice from the back of the bridge. It was Lieutenant Dre, one of the ship's engineers. We've completed initial repairs, but we got damage to the starboard engines. They're stable, but we can't jump to full speed without risk. We'll need time to get them fully functional again. Eric nodded, keeping his thoughts focused. They had won the battle, but they were not invincible. The warship was a marvel of human engineering, but even it had its limits. How long will the repairs take? Eric asked, his tone serious. At least 6 hours to get the engines running at full capacity, Dre replied. If we push it, we might be able to get a few more jumps out of them, but it's risky. Eric clenched his jaw. They couldn't afford to wait 6 hours, not with the unknown threat lurking in the shadows. But pushing the ship too hard could result in catastrophic failure. The decision was a delicate one. We'll take the risk, Eric said after a moment of consideration. We'll need to be ready to move at a moment's notice. Rhea, once you decode that signal, get me everything you can. I want to know exactly what the Solvents are hiding. Rhea nodded and returned to her console, her fingers flying over the keys. The air in the bridge grew tense. The crew focused on their tasks. It was as if everyone knew that the real battle was just beginning. Hours passed, each one filled with a sense of anticipation. The warship sat motionless in space, the crew working tirelessly to make repairs and decipher the Solvent signal. Eric found it hard to sit still, pacing back and forth in the silence of the bridge. His mind kept returning to that one question. What were the Solvents afraid of? The answer came sooner than he expected. Rhea turned to face him, her expression grim. I've cracked it, Captain, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The Solvents weren't just sending a distress signal. They were calling for backup from something called the Reclaimers. Eric's stomach dropped. He had never heard of the Reclaimers, but the way Rhea said it, like it was a name known to instill fear, sent a chill through him. The Reclaimers, Eric repeated, his voice low. What are they? Rhea shook her head. I don't know, but it's clear the Solvents are terrified. They'd been trying to hide from them for years. Whatever this group is, they're unlike anything we've ever encountered. Eric felt the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. This wasn't just a war anymore. The stakes had just gotten a lot higher. Prepare the crew, Eric said, his voice steady but full of resolve. We're not backing down. Whatever the Reclaimers are, we'll face them head-on, and we'll show them what humanity is capable of. The tension was palpable as the warship prepared to move once again. The Solvents had retreated, but the real threat, whatever it was was now the focus of their mission. Eric stood at the helm, the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders. The galaxy had just learned that Earth was a force to be reckoned with. But now it was time to face an even greater unknown, and humanity would stand its ground, no matter what came next. The warship moved silently through the vast emptiness of space, its crew on edge, each member acutely aware of the gravity of the situation. The earlier battle had been a moment of triumph, but that victory had come at a cost. The question now was whether they had made the right choice, pushing their damaged ship to its limits and risking everything. The Reclaimers. Eric couldn't shake the name from his mind. Whoever or whatever they were, they had terrified the Xalvans to the point of desperation. And now, that same fear had seeped into the very core of humanity's mission. What had they unleashed by pushing the Xalvans into summoning these Reclaimers? "Captain," came the voice of Rhea, breaking his thoughts. "We've detected something. It's faint, but it's out there." Eric stood up straight, his eyes narrowing. "What kind of signal?" he asked, his voice sharp, every part of him alert. "It's not from the Xalvans, but it's on the same frequency we've been monitoring," Rhea replied, her fingers flying over her console. "It's a long-range transmission, possibly from another ship. It's hard to say for sure, but it's not normal." Eric's mind raced. Could it be the Reclaimers already? Were they here? His thoughts were interrupted by a voice that made his stomach tighten. "Captain, we've got an incoming ship," reported Dre from the communication station. "It's coming fast, and it's big. Too big for any ship we know of." Rhea's hands froze on her console, and Eric turned sharply to face Dre. "What do you mean, too big?" "I mean it's massive," Dre said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Larger than any warship in the galaxy, by far." The room fell into tense silence. They had all seen the enormous might of the Xalvans. But this was different. Whatever was out there was not something they had prepared for. "Can you identify it?" Eric asked, his tone calm, but his mind racing. "We're trying," Dre said, "but it's like nothing we've ever seen before. The design is strange. It looks like it could be ancient. But the technology, it's too advanced. I can't make sense of it." Rhea turned to face Eric, her eyes wide. "It might be the Reclaimers." "They're coming, Captain." Eric's heart pounded. The Xalvans had been terrified of them. They had sent out a desperate call for help. And now, it seemed, the Reclaimers had answered. But what did that mean for humanity? What would this unknown force bring to the table? "Prepare the ship for battle," Eric commanded, his voice steady but with an edge of urgency. "Get us into defensive position. I don't care what it is, we're ready." The crew moved quickly, all of them working in unison to get the warship into fighting shape. But even as they prepared, Eric couldn't help but feel a creeping sense of dread. The unknown was always the most dangerous enemy. As the massive ship drew closer, the warship's sensors lit up, and the ominous shape of the incoming vessel began to take form. The ship was unlike anything they had ever seen, smooth, sleek, and massive, with an eerie glow emanating from its dark surface. It had an almost organic look, as though it were alive, but the technology was far beyond anything the humans had encountered. "Captain, the ship is within range," Rhea reported. "It's hailing us. We're being contacted." "Put it on," Eric ordered, his gaze never leaving the strange, glowing vessel. A moment later, the view screen flickered, and a dark figure appeared on the screen. It was humanoid in shape, but its features were obscured by a shimmering energy field, giving it an almost ethereal presence. It stood motionless, its eyes glowing faintly. And then, in a voice that resonated with power, it spoke. "We are the Reclaimers. You have crossed into our domain. Your actions will not go unpunished." The words were cold, final. The voice carried a weight that sent a shiver down Eric's spine. "We are humanity, and we don't run from a fight," Eric responded, his voice firm, showing no fear. The Reclaimer's figure tilted its head slightly, as though considering Eric's words. Then it spoke again, its voice unwavering. "You will regret this. The galaxy is not yours to conquer. You have no place in this war." The communication cut off abruptly, and the figure vanished from the screen. The room was silent for a moment, as everyone processed the threat that had just been delivered. Rhea looked up from her console, her face pale. "Captain, the ship is powering up. It's preparing to engage." Eric's pulse quickened. This was it, the moment they had all feared. "Get us out of here," he ordered. "We can't face that ship head-on. We need to regroup, make a plan." But just as he finished speaking, the warship's alarms blared, and the ship lurched forward. The reclaimer's ship had already begun to fire. The warship shook violently as the first blasts hit, the shields flaring with bright light as they absorbed the impact. But they couldn't hold out forever. The enemy ship's power was overwhelming. "Shields are holding, but they won't last long," Dre shouted. "Engage evasive maneuvers," Eric ordered, his mind racing. There was no choice but to fight, to find a way to survive. The crew worked quickly, trying to outmaneuver the overwhelming force. But with every passing second, it became clear that the warship was outmatched. The reclaimers were something else entirely. They weren't just a threat. They were an unknown force capable of destroying everything humanity had worked for. And this battle, it seemed, was only the beginning. The warship groaned under the barrage of energy blasts, each strike sending tremors through the hull. Eric's heart raced as his hands gripped the command console tightly, his mind constantly processing the situation, seeking a way out of this nightmare. The reclaimers were not like any enemy they had faced before. Their ship, massive and advanced, tore into the human warship's shields with an almost detached precision, their weapons far more potent than anything humanity had ever encountered. The enemy was too powerful, too mysterious. "Captain," Rhea's voice cut through the chaos. "We've sustained damage to the port side. Shields are down to 30%. Eric's eyes narrowed. He couldn't afford to panic. Evasive maneuvers. Full power to the remaining shields. He watched as the crew scrambled into action, doing their best to keep the warship intact. Yet even as they fought to stay afloat, Eric knew it was only a matter of time before they were overwhelmed. The reclaimer's ship loomed larger and more threatening by the minute. If they didn't come up with a plan, they would be destroyed. "Captain, we've got incoming fighters," Dre shouted, his voice tinged with fear. "They're swarming in from the reclaimer ship. It's a full-scale assault." "We need to buy ourselves time," Eric muttered under his breath. "Rhea, power up the secondary weapons. Let's see if we can't get their attention." Rhea's fingers flew across the console, her concentration intense. "Secondary weapons activated. We're ready to fire, but I'm not sure how much damage we'll do." "Fire everything we've got," Eric ordered. He couldn't afford to waste time worrying about whether their weapons were effective. They had to try. The warship's weapons hummed to life, and soon, blasts of energy shot out toward the reclaimer ship. The enemy responded immediately, their weapons firing faster, more accurately. It was clear they were prepared for combat on a level that the human crew simply couldn't match. "Captain, the fighters are closing in." Dre called again, urgency in his voice. "We won't be able to avoid them." Eric clenched his jaw. It felt like a hopeless situation. The reclaimers had come from nowhere, powerful and efficient, leaving no room for negotiation or mercy. It wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was a desperate battle to buy humanity enough time to escape or fight back. As the first wave of enemy fighters approached, Eric made a snap decision. "Rhea, break through their formation. We're going to push our way out." "But Captain, the fighters." "Now," Eric barked. There was no time to argue. They couldn't afford to stay in one place, not when the enemy had complete control of the battlefield. The warship swerved violently as Rhea expertly manipulated the controls, steering the ship between the reclaimer's fighters. It was a gamble, but it was their only chance. The fighters shot at them, but the ship's armor held firm, each shot only scratching the surface as they made their way toward the open space beyond the swarm. Braced for impact, Eric shouted, his knuckles white against the console. The warship broke through the enemy fighters, but not without taking damage. The vessel rocked, and alarms screamed throughout the ship. The crew struggled to keep things under control, but they managed to break free, at least for now. "We've made it out of their formation," Rhea reported, her voice tight with relief. "But they're closing in. We can't outrun them forever." Eric exhaled sharply. The immediate danger had passed, but they were still far from safe. They couldn't keep running, not with the enemy ship gaining on them. They had to fight back, but with their shields weakening and their weapons proving ineffective, it was hard to see how they could survive this. "We can't stay here," Eric said, thinking aloud. "We need to find a way to break their hold. If we can't win, we'll have to escape. We need a plan." He looked at Rhea, whose face was grim but determined. "What are our options, Captain?" He thought for a moment, a flicker of an idea sparking in his mind. "We need to disrupt their systems. If we can find a weakness in their ship, maybe we can cripple their ability to fight back. We'll have to get close enough to board." Rhea shook her head. "Boarding them? That's insane, Captain. We don't know what kind of technology they have on that ship. We're talking about facing an enemy that has no equal in the galaxy." "I know," Eric said, his voice quiet but resolute. "But if we don't try, we'll lose, and humanity won't give up without a fight." He turned to the crew, each of them looking to him for direction. This was it, the moment that would decide their fate. "Prepare for a boarding mission. Get everything ready. We'll go in fast, hit them hard, and find a way to make them regret this." The crew moved with determination. They weren't just fighting for their own lives anymore. They were fighting for the survival of humanity. The stakes were higher than ever before, and there was no turning back. Outside, the reclaimed ship continued its relentless pursuit. The crew of humanity's warship had just made their boldest move yet, and now it was a race against time to see if they could outsmart their enemies and survive the nightmarish battle ahead. The price of defiance had been steep, but for humanity, the cost of surrender was far worse. The warship shuddered under another direct hit. The flashing lights of the damage report pulsed across the control room, making it seem as if the ship itself was breathing its last breaths. Eric stood at the helm, staring out at the immense, looming silhouette of the Reclaimer's warship. It was relentless, a behemoth that refused to stop its pursuit. "We're running out of time, Captain," Rhea said, her voice tense. "Shields are down to 10%. If we don't do something fast, we'll be dead in space." Eric gripped the console tighter. He was used to danger, but this was different. This wasn't just another battle. This was the final test. He had led them to this point, and now he had to find a way to finish it. "Prepare the boarding teams," Eric said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of responsibility. "We're going in. We're going to give them everything we've got." Rhea hesitated, then nodded. She knew the risks, but the crew trusted him. The captain had always found a way to turn the tide, and they were willing to follow him to the end. The crew scrambled into action, preparing their gear for the boarding operation. The docking bay buzzed with activity as soldiers suited up, checking weapons, making sure every detail was accounted for. There was no room for error. If they didn't succeed, they wouldn't make it out alive. Eric stood by the viewport, watching the distant, hostile ship grow larger with each passing second. His mind raced, calculating the risks. Boarding the enemy ship was their last hope. They had no other choice. There was no retreat, no safe haven. Only the Reclaimers stood between humanity and total annihilation. "Eric," Rhea called, walking up to him. "Are you sure about this? The enemy is unlike anything we've faced before. We don't even know what they're capable of on their ship." Eric turned to face her, his expression grim but resolute. "I know, but we've been pushed into a corner. And humanity doesn't give up when it's backed into a corner. We fight. Always. Rhea gave him a nod of understanding. Then let's make sure we show them exactly who they're dealing with. The boarding teams were ready. Eric felt the weight of responsibility heavier now than ever before. These people had put their faith in him. They trusted him to lead them through the fire. Let's move out, Eric commanded. The crew of humanity's warship filed into the boarding pods, the adrenaline pumping through their veins. Eric was the last to enter. He sealed the door, feeling a sense of finality. The fate of humanity was about to be decided in the depths of the reclaimer ship. The pods were launched with explosive force, rocketing through space toward the enemy vessel. Outside the window, Eric could see the massive reclaimer warship, its sleek, intimidating form taking up the entire view. It seemed almost to mock them. So confident in its power, but Eric knew that humanity's resolve was far stronger than any weapon. As the pods neared their target, the onboard AI spoke, its voice robotic yet sharp. Approaching enemy vessel. Boarding in 30 seconds. The seconds seemed to drag, the countdown like the ticking of a death clock. Then, with a violent jolt, the boarding pods collided with the reclaimer's hull. The crew was flung forward as the pods latched onto the enemy ship, the magnetic seals clicking into place. Go, 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 Eric shouted, ripping open the hatch. The moment the door slid open, they were met with an eerie silence. The reclaimer ship's interior was unlike anything they had seen before. The walls were made of some unknown alloy, smooth and dark, and the corridors stretched endlessly ahead. It felt almost unnatural. Eric's pulse quickened as the weight of their mission settled in. Stay sharp, Eric warned, his voice low. The soldiers formed tight formations, weapons at the ready, as they moved through the corridors of the enemy ship. Every sound echoed, every corner a potential ambush. It was as if the reclaimers knew they were coming, but had prepared for everything. Eric and his team moved cautiously, but with purpose. The deeper they went, the more they realized just how advanced this enemy was. The technology in the reclaimer ship was beyond anything humanity had ever seen. Still, they pressed on, determined to find whatever weak point they could exploit. Then the first shot rang out. The sudden blast of energy hit one of the soldiers, sending him to the ground. The crew immediately returned fire, their weapons lighting up the dim corridors. The reclaimers were here. They had known the humans were coming, and they were ready for them. The battle inside the reclaimer ship was nothing short of chaotic. The soldiers moved in a blur, firing on anything that moved. The reclaimers were unlike any foe they had fought before, using strange, alien technology that seemed to adapt to every move the humans made. But the human spirit was a force of nature. No matter how powerful the enemy seemed, humanity would not yield. As Eric pressed forward, his mind raced with thoughts of victory, of how this moment would define humanity's future. He knew that this battle was about more than just survival. It was about proving to the galaxy that humanity would not be taken lightly, that they were a force to be reckoned with. In the heart of the reclaimer ship, they reached the control room. The door stood before them, thick and impenetrable. It was their final challenge. Eric didn't hesitate. He ordered the explosives to be set, the charge detonating with a deafening blast. The door gave way. Inside, the reclaimers were waiting, their leader standing at the far end of the room, watching the humans with cold, calculating eyes. "You think you can defeat us?" the reclaimer leader asked, his voice as cold as the depths of space. Eric stepped forward, his weapon aimed straight at the leader. "We don't need to defeat you. We just need to make sure you never forget who we are." And then, with a final charge, they fought.